Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The question echoed inside her mind as Cadet Morgan adjusted the strap of her worn rucksack, its frayed edge brushing against her shoulder. The hall buzzed with voices, confident, young, loud, the kind that filled empty space so no one would notice fear underneath. She stood still, eyes fixed on the stairs ahead, waiting for her turn to move, to exist. Then came the voice. "Go away, Ghost. Some of us have a war to prepare for." The words sliced through the low hum like a blade, sharp, deliberate, dripping with a kind of mockery that thrived on laughter. Cadet Captain Vance, tall, broad-shouldered, a product of legacy and ego, didn't even bother to lower his tone. The group around him snickered. Their laughter echoed off the cold marble walls of the West Point Hall. Morgan didn't move, didn't blink. She adjusted her pack again, eyes lowering to the polished granite stairs ahead, the stairs of legacy, they called them. Every step carved from stone taken from American battlefields, a monument you had to climb, not walk. Each step a sermon on duty. Vance watched her silence misread it. To him, it was submission, proof that she didn't belong. To her, it was survival. High above them, unseen behind mirrored glass, 3 visiting generals stood in the observation deck. They were there for the Crucible evaluation, the Academy's most demanding combat simulation, but one of them, General Thorne, wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching her. He saw what others didn't, the imperceptible shift in her stance, the way her center of gravity adjusted slightly, as if anticipating impact. The subtle bracing of core muscles that came not from fear, but from memory. The kind of body language you only learned in war zones, not classrooms. And then it happened. The shove wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even loud. Just a casual, contemptuous act, Vance's shoulder clipping hers as he passed. A muttered oops, heavy with sarcasm. Her boot slipped. The granite met her like a hammer. Time fractured a scatter of sounds. Canvas scraping stone. A helmet bouncing down the steps. A muffled gasp. A silence. Her rucksack burst open, its contents scattered like secrets, a neatly folded field map, a battered copy of The Art of War, a small compass, and a sealed ration pouch. No personal trinkets, no indulgence, just essentials. The snickers died. Even Vance froze for half a breath, realizing maybe, just maybe, the room had gone too still. Morgan didn't cry, didn't even groan. She just moved. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself up, palms steady against the stone. Blood traced a thin red line across her cheek. Her breathing was calm, too calm. She gathered her belongings one by one, careful, precise, checked each item as if nothing had happened. Her silence filled the room like smoke. Vance waited for something, outrage, tears, a protest, anything that would give him dominance again. But all he got was nothing. The quiet unnerved him. The void swallowed his victory. She rose, slung the pack over her shoulder, and began climbing again, each step even, steady, unbroken. The cadets parted for her this time, their eyes flicking between pity and something unfamiliar, fear. Up on the observation deck, General Thorne leaned closer to the glass, knuckles white on the railing. "Give me her file," he muttered. The aide blinked. "Sir." "Not the Academy transcript," Thorne said. "Her service jacket, everything." Down below, Morgan reached the top of the stairs. She didn't look back. By noon, the Academy's chatter had already moved on. There was no shortage of spectacle here, only hierarchy, and humiliation was just another form of entertainment. But for Morgan, the noise of the day blurred into a dull hum. She kept her routine unbroken: lunch, training drills, data analysis. Every motion was a ritual of control. Pain in her ankle, registered, compartmentalized, forgotten. No one knew what she was thinking. But if someone had looked close enough, they might have seen the faintest flicker of resolve behind her eyes. Not vengeance, not pride, just purpose. That night, she sat alone in her quarters. The only light came from the glow of her data slate. Her fingers moved across the screen, reviewing tactical simulations. She paused on a schematic of the Crucible, the massive billion-dollar combat simulator beneath the Academy grounds. Tomorrow she'd be inside it. For most cadets, the Crucible was a proving ground, their last test before graduation. For Morgan, it was something else. She wasn't here to prove herself. She was here to observe. But no one knew that. Morning. The Crucible roared to life like a sleeping beast. Massive hollow projectors painted a war-torn city across the simulation field, collapsing skyscrapers, burning vehicles, holographic debris that felt too real underfoot. The system could simulate any terrain, any condition, desert, jungle, mountain. Today, it was an urban hellscape. Two companies faced off. Alpha Company, led by Cadet Captain Vance. Bravo Company, a ragtag mix of underdogs, the insurgent force meant to lose. Morgan was assigned to Bravo. She limped slightly as she entered the staging bay, her uniform neat despite the bruise spreading down her shin. The instructor, checking the roster, frowned. "Cadet Morgan, you're cleared for this." "Yes, sir." "You sure?" "Yes, sir." He moved on. The briefing screens flickered. Vance stood before his Alpha Company, the golden boy commanding the best equipment, the best cadets, the best odds. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast. Shock and awe," he said, his voice full of swagger. "Let's show the generals what real warriors look like." They cheered. Across the room, Bravo Company remained quiet. Morgan stood at the back, studying the digital map on her slate, tracing grid lines with her fingertip. Every sector, every blind spot, every bottleneck. Her mind wasn't on survival. It was on understanding the system. She noticed something, a pattern in the AI's response time, a refresh delay. Tiny but exploitable. The simulation began. Light dissolved, reality blinked away. And suddenly she was there inside the city. The sound of gunfire tore through the holographic streets. The ground shook with the thud of simulated artillery. The air smelled like burnt ozone and dust, a mix of illusion and memory. Vance's forces moved like a machine, armored vehicles, drone overwatch, disciplined formations. Bravo Company scattered. Within minutes, their communications were chaos. Their designated commander was killed by a sniper round. The chain of command shattered. Panic spread. Vance's voice echoed over the simulated commnet. "Enemy is folding, push forward, don't give them time to regroup." The generals on the observation deck nodded. "Good aggression," one murmured. "Solid command presence." Only Thorne remained silent. His gaze wasn't on Vance's victory. It was on a small secondary monitor showing Bravo Company's vitals. Dozens of signals spiking with stress. Dozens, except one. One heartbeat steady. Unflinching. Morgan's. Down in the city's ruins, she crouched behind a collapsed wall, breath steady, movements minimal. Around her, the simulation screamed distant explosions, radio static, men shouting for orders that wouldn't come. She ignored it all. She was working. She accessed a hidden data channel, a maintenance network embedded in the Crucible's deep code. Few cadets even knew it existed, but she had read the entire technical manual, all 1,200 pages, twice. She began sending messages. Short, precise, anonymous. Sniper team, Grid 4C exploit projector delay. Fire between refresh cycles. Squad 3, sewer access at 7B power conduit beneath enemy CP unshielded. EMP operator, Grid 2A wait for resupply vehicle pattern. Strike between cycles. No emotion, no explanation, just logic. One by one, cadets started to respond, not knowing who was guiding them, only that it was working. A sniper pair suddenly became invisible to Alpha Company's thermal sensors. A timed EMP knocked out an entire armored convoy. The city began to shift. Small winds, tiny tremors, but together a storm. Alpha's advance slowed, then stalled, then cracked. Upstairs, the generals leaned forward. "What's happening?" one whispered. "Alpha's losing ground." "That's impossible." Thorne didn't answer. He just pointed to the single steady heartbeat on his monitor. Vance slammed his fist against the console. "Find them, find who's coordinating this." But there was no commander to find. No face, no voice, just a network of ghosts bleeding his force dry, one cut at a time. The simulation's AI struggled to adapt. It wasn't designed to fight this kind of enemy. It was designed for conventional warfare, not asymmetry. And Morgan knew it. She moved through the city like vapor, silent, efficient. Every motion measured, every decision cold and clear. Her limp was gone now, her body operating on instinct, on muscle memory built somewhere far from this academy, somewhere real. In the observation deck, Thorne exhaled slowly. "It's her," he said quietly. "Her who?" General Matt asked. Thorne's voice was low. "The cadet, Morgan, it's all coming from her." The others stared at him, disbelief flickering across their faces as Alpha Company began to crumble. On the screen, Vance's units were being dismantled piece by piece, not through brute strength, through intelligence, patience, timing. Ghosts. That's what they were now. And she was teaching them how to haunt. Hours later, as the simulation's clock neared its end, the final act unfolded in silence. Vance's forces, once unstoppable, were pinned down, their comms fractured, their morale gone. His command post flickered under emergency lighting. His eyes were hollow, wild. Then a shadow moved behind him. He spun, weapon raised. And there she was. Morgan. Unarmed, calm. A smear of dirt on her face, a small tear on her sleeve. "How?" he stammered. "How'd you?" She raised a hand, tapped her shoulder twice, the signal for friendly, then gently reached out and tapped his shoulder. A chime sounded overhead. "Cadet Captain Vance, status neutralized. Alpha Company, mission failure." The city dissolved. The light returned. And silence fell, the kind that cuts through bone. No one spoke. Bravo Company, the losers by design, had just achieved the impossible. And at the center of it all stood the girl they had ignored. Her face expressionless. Her heart rate steady. Her silence, once mocked, now thundered louder than any cheer. Up on the observation deck, General Thorne whispered, "Find her file." And somewhere deep inside the Academy's secure server, an encrypted name waited to be opened. Why did the room feel colder after the victory screen went dark? The lights came up in the crucible chamber, washing the stunned cadets in sterile white. No one moved, no one even breathed. The scoreboard was wrong, it had to be. Bravo Company, the insurgents, the underdogs meant to lose, had somehow defeated Alpha, the golden unit, the pride of the Academy. And not just defeated them. They dismantled them, piece by piece. Cadet Captain Vance stood frozen in the center of the field, his expression blank, his mind struggling to reconcile what had happened. Around him, his soldiers stood in disarray, their faces painted with disbelief. A few Bravo cadets were looking at each other, as if waiting for someone to explain how they'd done the impossible. But no one looked at Morgan. Not yet. She stood alone in the corner, helmet tucked under her arm, posture straight but relaxed, eyes calm. The scrape on her cheek from the fall still marked her, but it didn't make her look wounded. It made her look real. Her breathing was steady, as if she'd just taken a walk instead of turning a battle upside down. The instructors were whispering, trying to make sense of the outcome. The simulation's algorithms weren't supposed to allow for an insurgent victory. Even with exceptional performance, the system was designed to overwhelm the weaker force. Statistical anomaly, one instructor muttered. Number glitch, said another. But up on the observation deck, General Thorne wasn't talking. He just watched her, eyes narrow, jaw tight, the faintest recognition forming like a memory he didn't want to believe. Then finally he spoke. Pull her file. The words fell heavy. His aide hesitated. Sir, Academy access doesn't. Thorne's voice cut through him like a blade. Not her cadet file, her service file. A silence. Then a nervous swallow. Yes, sir. The other two generals, Matt and Pierce, exchanged confused glances. Thorne, Matt said quietly, what are you doing? Thorne didn't answer. He just stared down at Morgan as she slung her pack over her shoulder and began to walk off the simulation floor. She's not supposed to be here, he said finally. At least not like this. Minutes later, the instructors had gathered in the control room. The air felt electric, the kind of tense quiet before a detonation. A data slate rested in the middle of the console, a secure channel link flickering on the screen. File request, Morgan A, classified, restricted level 7. Even the senior tech officers hesitated. Sir, this requires triple-star clearance, one said. You'd need. You have it, Thorne said simply. He entered his code. Authorization 1 of 3, accepted General Thorne J. The other generals looked uneasy. Thorne, this is irregular, Pierce said. Irregular is the right word, Thorne replied, because nothing about what we just saw is regular. Matt frowned. You think she cheated? Thorne's eyes flicked up. No, I think she remembered. The console beeped again. Awaiting additional authorizations. Pierce sighed and entered his code. Authorization 2 of 3, accepted General Pierce D. Matt hesitated. Matt, Thorne said quietly, you saw her. You saw the way she moved. That wasn't cadet training. That was field conditioning. Combat posture, the kind you don't learn unless you've been shot at. Matt exhaled and keyed in his code. Authorization 3 of 3, accepted General Matt H. The screen flickered. Triple-star validation complete. File DCRYPTING. The room dimmed. And then words began to appear. Not a cadet record. A dossier. The first line hit like a punch. Strategic Operations Group 7 Project, Chimera. Classification, Top Secret /NOFORN. Active Duty Officer rank, Major. Code name, Ghost. The instructors stared. Someone swore under their breath. The screen scrolled. Decoration, citations, commendations. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star with 4 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star for Valor. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Intelligence Star. Each one told a story of survival, of things done in silence far beyond any academy exercise. Then the combat history, mostly redacted. Thick black bars swallowing lines of text, but the visible fragments were chilling. Operational Theater, Eastern Europe classified. Operational Theater, Horn of Africa classified. Specialization, Asymmetrical Warfare Deep Infiltration / Cyber Operations. Status, Active, Undercover Evaluation Assignment. Then the final entry appeared. Current Objective, Internal Audit and Behavioral Assessment of Officer Training Doctrine, West Point Military Academy. Authorization, Joint Chiefs Directive 9173. A silence deeper than any before filled the room. It was General Thorne who finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. She's not a student, he said softly. She's an auditor. The instructors just stared. A what? One whispered. A ghost, Thorne said. sent to test the academy from within, to observe, to evaluate, to see what we've become. He leaned closer to the screen, eyes hard, and we failed. When the generals emerged from the control room, the entire facility had gone still. The cadets were gathered in groups, whispering, sensing something monumental had just happened. Vance was standing apart, rigid, pale, humiliated. He'd been summoned to the observation deck for debriefing. He didn't understand why. He didn't know that in the next few minutes, the ground beneath his entire world was about to collapse. The three generals walked in silence. Their boots echoed on the polished tile. Behind them, aides trailed nervously, carrying the decrypted report on tablets sealed with red digital locks. In the main auditorium, the instructors assembled, confused, uneasy, whispering. Then the announcement came through the loudspeakers. Attention all personnel. By direct order of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this facility is now under complete lockdown. All external communications are severed. All cadets and staff are to remain in their assigned locations until further notice. This is not a drill. Gasps rippled through the hallways. The West Point Military Academy, fortress of American legacy, just became a sealed vault. Outside, security teams fanned out across the campus. Gates shut, signals jammed. Military police took positions at intersections, weapons lowered but ready. Inside, the hum of technology dimmed to a low, pulsing hum. The academy had become a tomb. In the command office, the three generals stood facing the superintendent, a man whose confidence was unraveling by the second. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the cadet who won the simulation was a major, a decorated operative?" Thorne didn't blink. "I'm telling you she was sent here to test you, to test all of us." The superintendent's voice trembled, and the incident on the stairs. Matt's tone was cold. A cadet captain shoved her, publicly, on a camera feed. Silence. The superintendent looked sick. "She's not just anyone," Thorne said. "She's the daughter of Colonel Aidan Morgan, the first commander of Project Chimera, one of the finest tacticians this country has ever produced. I served with him. She's his legacy. And she was shoved to the ground by a boy who thought noise equaled strength." No one spoke. The truth sat between them, heavy and immovable. That evening, the entire faculty and senior cadet corps were ordered to assemble in the main auditorium. The air was thick, anticipation, guilt, confusion. General Matt took the stage. He didn't need the microphone. His voice was thunder on its own. "For years," he began, "we've heard whispers that this academy has grown soft, that it produces arrogance instead of honor. We dismissed it as rumor." He paused, eyes sweeping across the crowd. "Today we learned the truth." He pointed toward the row of cadets in the front, toward Vance, standing stiff, face pale as chalk. "You have mistaken pedigree for potential. You have mistaken volume for value. You've built a culture that rewards pride and punishes humility. You applauded noise and ignored competence." Every word was a hammer blow. "And today," Matt said, "you humiliated one of the most capable soldiers alive, a woman who's walked through real wars while you boys play at one." The room went dead silent. General Thorne stepped forward, his voice low but cutting. "When she fell on those stairs, I saw it. The way she took the impact, the way she protected her corps, that wasn't fear, that was experience. She fell like a soldier. She got up like one." The silence thickened. "Major Morgan," Matt said finally, "please step forward." A ripple moved through the crowd as Morgan appeared at the back of the auditorium. Still in her scuffed cadet uniform, her limp barely noticeable. She walked down the center aisle as the entire hall parted before her. Vance couldn't look at her. When she reached the stage, the three generals descended the steps to meet her. And then, without a word, they saluted. Three generals, saluting a woman still wearing a cadet patch. The sound of their hands striking their brows echoed through the hall like a gunshot. And one by one, every instructor, every officer, every cadet rose to their feet and followed. 1,000 salutes, in perfect reverent silence. The same silence she had been mocked for. The same silence that had become her greatest weapon. Next to her, Vance stood trembling. His salute was the last to rise, clumsy, late, ashamed. For the first time, he understood the weight of it. He had saluted the ghost he'd tried to exorcise. That night, the lockdown stayed in effect. But something else spread through the academy, not fear, not gossip, but awareness. Every cadet knew, every hallway whispered. The ghost had a name now. Morgan. No one spoke it above a whisper, but they all felt it. Something sacred had been revealed, and something rotten exposed. The academy would never be the same again. What does silence sound like when it commands 1,000 soldiers? In the grand auditorium, that sound filled the air, the quiet aftermath of a revelation so heavy it seemed to slow time itself. Every cadet stood frozen in salute. Every instructor stared, hearts pounding, unable to speak. The echo of 3 generals' salute to a cadet. A woman they now knew was Major Morgan, a decorated operative, had shattered everything this academy thought it understood about leadership. The salute wasn't just respect. It was an indictment. And it burned. Vance's arm trembled midair, his mind unraveling as realization crashed over him like waves. He had mocked her, pushed her, laughed while she fell. And all along, he'd been standing in front of someone who had already seen real wars, who had carried men bleeding through dust and chaos, who had done what he only pretended to. When the generals lowered their hands, no one else moved. The silence felt sacred. General Matt turned to face the crowd again, his voice raw, stripped of command polish. "You have all witnessed something today that will not be written in any manual," he said, "but it will live in every one of you. The greatest strength a soldier can have isn't arrogance, it's restraint, it's quiet competence." He let the words hang there before turning toward Vance. "Cadet Captain Vance," he said sharply, "front and center." Vance obeyed, each step heavy as lead. He stopped 3 feet from the stage and saluted with shaking fingers. General Matt didn't return it. "You are a disgrace to that uniform," Matt said softly, and somehow that hurt worse than a shout. "You laid hands on a superior officer. You fostered a culture of humiliation and ego. You failed the one duty every leader must uphold, respect." Vance swallowed, eyes glistening. His mouth opened but no sound came. General Thorne stepped closer, voice like cold steel. "You stood in the presence of greatness and saw only weakness, because you were too loud to listen." Then, turning toward the audience, Thorne said, "This academy has become a mirror of its own arrogance. You train soldiers to perform, not to understand. You build ranks, not leaders." He gestured toward Morgan, who stood silent beside them. "This woman, this ghost you ignored, is the kind of soldier every one of you should aspire to be. Her silence is not meekness, it is mastery." And with that, the generals turned and walked off the stage. No more words. No applause. Just silence again, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was reverence. The next morning, the investigation began. Not by the Academy's internal review board. That authority had been stripped from them. A special team from the Inspector General's office arrived before dawn. They came without ceremony. Dark uniforms, emotionless faces, sealed orders. Every instructor, every senior cadet, every administrative officer was interviewed. Files confiscated. Communication logs secured. It wasn't a witch hunt, it was a reckoning. For days, the academy moved in a kind of suspended animation. The usual drills, parades, and routines continued, but the sound of boots on the parade ground felt different, hesitant, reflective. The word ghost had spread like a quiet prayer. No one said Major Morgan aloud, not even the generals. They simply called her the auditor. And when she appeared in the corridors, cadets stood aside, not from fear, from respect. Vance was summoned first. His disciplinary hearing was brief, brutally so. He stood before a board of officers, his cadet insignia gleaming under harsh fluorescent light. The charges were read aloud. Conduct unbecoming physical aggression against a superior, dereliction of duty, abuse of authority. He didn't defend himself. There was nothing to defend. When the verdict came, it wasn't expulsion. It was worse. Cadet Captain Vance, the presiding officer said, you are hereby stripped of your rank and privileges. You will recommence your training as a first-year plebe, effective immediately. You will start again from zero. The sound of metal scraping against his collar, as the insignia was torn off, echoed through the hall like a wound opening. Vance's face stayed blank, but inside, the realization hit with surgical precision. This wasn't punishment. It was purification. He would live the humility he had mocked. When he left the room, cadets avoided his gaze, but not out of mockery, out of discomfort. They were seeing what arrogance looked like when it had been gutted. Meanwhile, Morgan remained largely unseen. Her presence, once invisible, had become mythic, the quiet figure that seemed to appear in hallways and training fields, watching, listening, taking notes. She was drafting her report, the kind of document that could reshape institutions. It was said she wrote it in silence, long into the night, with only the faint hum of the ventilation and the scratch of her stylus breaking the stillness. Those who caught glimpses of her described her expression as calm, focused, but not vengeful. She wasn't writing out of bitterness. She was writing out of duty. A week later, the lockdown lifted. But before the gates reopened, the generals gathered the faculty one last time in the auditorium. General Thorne stood before them, holding a printed copy of Morgan's report, a thin stack of pages, bound in plain black. No title, no signature, just the word audit. He opened to the first page and began to read aloud. The Academy's current culture rewards aggression over discipline, charisma over competence. It confuses performance with leadership and noise with confidence. It must be broken before it breaks us. The room was silent. He continued. The cadets are trained to win battles, not wars of understanding. The instructors have become mirrors of their own success rather than mentors of future excellence. Leadership is not a performance. It is an inheritance of integrity. Thorne lowered the paper and looked up. She didn't just criticize you, he said softly. She gave us a blueprint. He turned the next page. Recommendation 1. Introduce mandatory red team programs. Infiltration and subversion exercises conducted by elite operatives to test cadet integrity under pressure. Recommendation 2. Replace performance-based evaluations with adaptive scenario testing, emphasizing restraint, empathy, and moral reasoning. Recommendation 3. Mandate study of asymmetrical warfare and the psychology of insurgency, focusing not on dominance, but understanding. When Thorne finished, the silence was absolute. Even the air seemed to pause. General Matt stepped forward. This, he said, holding up the report, will become the foundation of the new doctrine. No one argued. No one dared. Because everyone in that room knew the Academy hadn't been tested by a war simulation. It had been tested by a single woman's patience. That evening, Morgan was seen one final time. The library, her quiet refuge. A group of first-year cadets sat huddled at a table, struggling to decode a complex tactical analysis. Their whispers were anxious, defeated. Morgan approached, pulled up a chair, and sat with them. She didn't lecture, she asked questions, drew diagrams. When one cadet struggled to understand the concept of controlled withdrawal, she smiled faintly and said, "It's not retreat, it's adaptation." Her voice was calm, human. No rank, no intimidation, just understanding. The cadets leaned in, listening, and in that moment they weren't being taught by a soldier, they were being taught by a professional. As she stood to leave, one of them asked, "Ma'am, what do we call you?" She paused, a faint smile crossed her face. "Call me Morgan," she said, "that's enough." Then she was gone. Outside, the campus was quiet. The stairs of legacy, the same granite steps where she had fallen, glowed faintly under the lamplight. A janitor was polishing the railing. He turned as she approached. It was Vance. No longer a captain, no longer a leader, just a cadet. He straightened to attention the moment he saw her. His voice was quiet, choked. "Ma'am." She stopped, looked at him. For a heartbeat, they just stood there, two soldiers separated by a canyon of choices. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. He didn't deserve absolution, but he could earn understanding. And that was enough. She turned, walked down the path, and vanished into the night. The next morning, a brass plaque appeared beside the steps. No statue, no portrait, just words. The auditor, competence is quiet. From that day, cadets touched the wall beside the step before every major exam, a quiet superstition, a salute to the ghost who'd rebuilt their world. And somewhere, far from the academy, in a place where the stars burned cold and missions had no names, Major Morgan received her next assignment. She opened it, read it once, and folded it away. No celebration, no ceremony. Just silence. Because for her, that was enough. Why do ghosts linger? Not the kind that rattle chains in the dark, but the kind that stay in silence, not haunting walls but hearts. A year had passed since the day Major Morgan disappeared from West Point. The lockdown had lifted, the base reopened, and life had resumed its steady rhythm. But something deep inside the academy had changed, something invisible, irreversible. The brass plaque beside the stairs of legacy gleamed faintly in the morning light. The auditor, competence is quiet. No one walked over that step anymore. Cadets stepped around it, a quiet ritual, unspoken but universal. They didn't know who started it. Maybe it began the day after she left, when someone placed a single white card on the step. On it, in simple letters, one word: respect. No one touched the card. No one moved it. Over time, it became part of the myth. The academy itself had been reborn, restructured from the inside out. The old traditions, the hazing, the loud competitions for dominance, the hierarchy of privilege, were dismantled piece by piece. In their place came something harder, quieter, and infinitely more demanding. The new curriculum, built from Morgan's audit report, was brutal in its subtlety. Every cadet now faced unwinnable simulations, scenarios designed not to test victory, but humility. In one exercise, entire platoons were ordered to hold positions that would inevitably fall. The purpose wasn't survival, it was how they led when defeat became certain. Another test forced cadets to rescue civilians trapped between two enemy lines, where every wrong choice cost points, not lives, but the moral weight felt real. Failure wasn't punished anymore. Arrogance was. For the first time in decades, the academy didn't celebrate the loudest cadets at graduation ceremonies. It celebrated the quietest, those who adapted, listened, endured. The ones who didn't need an audience to do the right thing. And in that silence, Morgan's ghost thrived. Vance was still there. Every morning before dawn, he could be found at the base of the stairs of legacy, polishing the brass rail with slow, deliberate motions. His gray uniform was plain, stripped of insignia, No captain's pins, no honor badges, just the bare uniform of a plebe. He didn't do it because anyone ordered him to. He asked for it. It wasn't punishment, it was penance. The new cadets didn't recognize him at first. To them, he was just another quiet upper year helping out with maintenance duty. But sometimes, when they looked closer, they noticed the precision in his movements, the discipline of a man who once commanded but now chose to serve. He rarely spoke. When he did, his words were simple, almost rehearsed. "Always double-check your footing," he'd say as they passed the stairs. "And if you fall, get back up the way she did." No one asked who she was. They already knew. That year's incoming class was different. They didn't come from long lines of officers or family legacies. Many were scholarship recruits, volunteers, or candidates from overlooked districts. The selection board, under direct order of General Thorne, had overhauled admissions. "No more dynasties," Thorne had said. "No more names that open doors. Let skill open them." Among the new cadets was one named Avery. 19, quiet, sharp-eyed, the kind of student who didn't raise her hand in class but always knew the answer. She came from a mining town in Pennsylvania. No military ties, no sponsors, no safety net. She had read about Major Morgan, everyone had, but to her the story wasn't legend, it was a lifeline. Someone like Morgan, overlooked, underestimated, had proven that quiet didn't mean weak. During orientation, when the command sergeant major gave his now famous speech at the base of the stairs, Avery listened, heart pounding. He gestured to the steps. "A year ago, right here," he began, "a soldier disguised as a cadet was shoved to the ground because she was quiet, because some fool mistook her discipline for weakness. She got up without a word and then dismantled our strongest unit in a single afternoon." He paused, letting the story settle into the air like dust. "She broke our army to save it. So when you walk these halls, remember, professionalism is quiet. You don't have to shout to lead." He turned and nodded toward the janitor polishing the railing, "Vance." "And sometimes," the sergeant added, "redemption is quieter still." The cadets clapped softly. Avery didn't. She just stared at the step that changed everything. Something about it felt alive. The weeks rolled into months. The new Crucible simulations were merciless. Gone were the scripted battles where the outcome was predictable. Instead, the AI now adapted dynamically to cadet decisions, sometimes rewarding compassion, sometimes punishing recklessness. And every so often, deep within the coding, a mysterious tag appeared in mission data files. Ghost Protocol. No one knew what it meant. The instructors claimed it was a random software tag left over from older simulations. But some cadets swore that when the tag appeared, strange things happened, unexpected variables, hidden objectives, unseen observers. Avery encountered it during her third simulation, a hostage rescue scenario in a flooded tunnel. Her squad panicked when communications failed, but she kept her voice steady. "Stay low, conserve oxygen, follow the current," she said calmly. Later, when the mission ended, her instructor asked, "Who told you to do that?" "No one," she said. "It just felt right." The instructor didn't reply. He'd seen the tag appear on the monitor moments before. Ghost Protocol. Meanwhile, far away from the academy, in a classified operations center, buried beneath layers of security clearance, Major Morgan reviewed live feeds from the new training systems. Her face was illuminated by the soft blue glow of holographic screens. The data streams reflected in her eyes, thousands of cadet heart rates, decision trees, behavioral analytics. She saw patterns forming, improvements. The academy was healing. Her voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "Show me the performance logs on Cadet Vance." The AI assistant complied instantly, displaying footage from the past year. There he was no longer arrogant, no longer leading with ego. He spoke less, listened more. He volunteered for the hardest tasks, tutored struggling cadets, and never sought recognition. When a young recruit fell during a field exercise, Vance didn't bark orders. He knelt beside her, adjusted her pack, and said quietly, "You're doing fine. Just breathe." Morgan watched for a long time, then whispered to herself, "Good." She closed the file. Back at West Point, the transformation had become cultural. The grand hall, once echoing with brash laughter and loud challenges, now carried a softer rhythm. Cadets discussed strategy in low tones, arguments replaced by questions. Instructors led by example, not intimidation. The old portraits of scowling generals still hung on the walls, but beside them now stood a single empty frame, blank, gold-edged, with a small brass plaque beneath it. For those who serve without being seen. Every cadet knew who it honored. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Hudson, Vance found himself standing alone at the base of the stairs. The campus was quiet, only the distant cadence of marching drills echoing faintly across the parade field. He set down his polishing cloth and looked up the long stretch of granite steps. For a long time he said nothing. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "I used to think leadership was about being followed." He shook his head softly. "She taught me it's about being remembered for the right reasons." The words drifted away into the twilight. Behind him, footsteps approached, light, hesitant. It was Cadet Avery. "Sir," she said quietly. He turned, startled, then realized she wasn't calling him that out of rank, but out of respect. "I wanted to ask," she said, "did you know her, the auditor?" He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly, not proud, not sad, just honest. "Yes," he said, "and she knew me. That's what hurt most." He glanced at the plaque on the wall. "She once told me something without ever speaking it." "What was it?" Avery asked. "That the loudest part of redemption," he said, "is silence." Avery nodded, unsure what to say. She stood beside him for a moment, looking at the step glowing under the last light of day. Then quietly she said, "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Vance's eyes stayed on the horizon. "She never left," he said softly. "Look around, she's everywhere." And as the floodlights flickered on across the academy grounds, their glow reflected off the brass plaque, off the railing, off the calm faces of cadets walking past, each one carrying a small piece of the ghost who had rebuilt them. She wasn't there in body, but her presence, her silence, had become doctrine. Because sometimes the loudest voice in history is the one that never needs to speak again. How do you test an army that no longer fights for applause? For a year, West Point had lived in its own quiet revolution, a rebirth shaped by the ghost of a woman who taught them that silence was strength. The cadets had grown leaner, sharper, calmer. They had learned to think like shadows, to win not through force but through understanding. But peace breeds assumptions. And assumptions, she had warned them, are the deadliest enemy of all. It began with a message. A routine logistics transmission that wasn't routine at all. At 200 hours, the Academy's communications servers received a data packet from a military network in Eastern Europe. The signature was encrypted under standard NATO channels, but the encryption was wrong, too perfect. No digital fingerprint, no latency. By the time the night shift technician noticed, the packet had already replicated itself. Every terminal in the academy flickered. Every system froze. The message displayed in cold white text. Evaluation Stage 2. And then static. Within minutes, alarms blared. The old klaxons that hadn't sounded since the lockdown echoed through the campus, jolting cadets awake. Vance was among the first to reach the command corridor. He burst into the control room, breath steady, eyes scanning the flickering monitors. What happened? He asked. The technician shook his head pale. It's a cyber breach, multi-vector intrusion, source unknown. Vance leaned over the console. The word Stage 2 pulsed on every screen like a heartbeat. He whispered the words under his breath. It's her. The technician frowned. Sir. Vance didn't answer. He stared at the monitors, a small, involuntary smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It's not an attack, he said. It's a test. But this time, it wasn't part of the curriculum. By dawn, the campus was in full lockdown. Drones hovered overhead. Security teams swept through dormitories. The command staff gathered in the main operations center, staring at walls of cascading data. The breach wasn't destructive. It wasn't erasing files or corrupting networks. It was reorganizing them. Simulations rebooted themselves. New mission protocols appeared from nowhere, tagged with a single identifier. Ghost Protocol /Stage 2. General Thorne arrived within the hour. His face was hard, eyes burning with something between anger and awe. He didn't speak to the tech officers. He went straight to Vance. Do you believe this is her? Thorne asked quietly. Vance nodded once. I don't believe I know. Thorne's jaw tightened. She's not authorized to conduct further evaluations. Vance met his gaze. When was she ever authorized the first time? The general didn't respond. They both knew the truth. Major Morgan never asked for permission, only forgiveness, and only when it mattered. The cadets were assembled on the parade ground by noon. The air was sharp, filled with the metallic scent of tension. General Thorne stood before them, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Effective immediately, the Academy will undergo a real-time assessment of readiness. This is not a drill. You will follow all standing orders, maintain discipline, and treat this as an active operational scenario. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Avery, standing near the front of her unit, leaned toward Vance, now an assistant instructor assigned to leadership development. Sir, what does this mean? Vance's eyes stayed on the horizon. It means she's back, he said softly. By 1300 hours, the transformation began. The Crucible, the Academy's massive simulation complex, came online, unprompted. The holographic projectors activated on their own. Buildings around campus flickered, re-rendering into tactical zones. Barracks became safe houses. Classrooms became bunkers. The dining hall transformed into a forward command post. Every cadet's comlink buzzed with a new message. Mission start 1300, objective unknown, observe, adapt, endure. And then silence. No instructor issued orders. No one explained the parameters. The cadets were on their own. Avery's team gathered inside a repurposed dormitory, now projected as a bombed-out warehouse. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her rifle interface. This isn't one of the scheduled sims, she said. No one's running control. Vance, now embedded with her team as an advisor, crouched beside the map table. That's the point, he said. She wants to see what happens when no one's in charge. He pointed at the blinking red zone on the holomap, a simulated breach at the communications hub. That's our first test. Avery hesitated. You think she's watching? Vance gave a faint, knowing smile. She's always watching. They moved fast. Teams deployed across the campus-stern battleground. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping positions. The cadets worked in silence, no bravado, no shouting. Every unit operated with uncanny discipline, applying the doctrine Morgan had left behind. Adaptability, empathy, restraint. Then came the curveball. The AI-generated hostiles, insurgent forces normally rendered in standard training mode, started moving unpredictably. They spoke, negotiated, trapped units not with firepower but with moral dilemmas. In one sector, A team was ordered to hold a checkpoint but encountered civilians simulated refugees. The AI's emotional realism was unprecedented. The cadets hesitated. The enemy wasn't shooting, they were begging. And every hesitation was recorded. Avery's comm buzzed again. A new message flashed. Morality is a weapon. Use it. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a simulation anymore. It was a mirror, and she could feel someone on the other side of it. In the command tower, Thorne watched the chaos unfold with clenched fists. Every unit's biometric data streamed across the monitors. Stress levels spiking, heart rates climbing, decision patterns fracturing under moral pressure. And yet they weren't breaking. Thorne leaned closer to the main display. "Look at them," he murmured. "They are thinking." The lead technician swallowed. "Sir, she's modified the AI mid-run. It's not just training them, it's learning from them." Thorne's eyes widened. "She's turning them into her successors." Hours passed. The battle stretched into the night. Avery's team had taken heavy simulated losses, their ammo depleted. They were pinned in a makeshift shelter, waiting for the final push. Vance knelt beside her, calm despite the chaos outside. "Remember what she taught us," he said. Avery looked at him, exhaustion etched across her face. "She never taught me, I never met her." He nodded slowly. "You didn't have to." Then over the comms, a single unfamiliar voice broke the static, low, even, unmistakable. "Unit Bravo 7, this is Auditor. Your scenario ends when you understand why it began." Avery froze. That voice, calm, steady, female. She looked at Vance, eyes wide. "Is that?" He nodded once. "Yes." Static hissed. Then another line came through, softer. "Leadership is not control, it's comprehension. What do you see, cadet?" Avery swallowed, her throat dry. She stared out at the flickering holographic battlefield. "I see confusion, fear, people waiting for someone to tell them what to do." "Then tell them," the voice said. Avery hesitated, then stood, heart pounding. "All right," she called out. "We're not fighting for points. We're fighting for understanding. Spread out, find the unarmed civilians first. Secure them. Then find the wounded, both sides." The team obeyed, no hesitation. The battle shifted instantly. The AI forces paused, reconfigured. Civilians disappeared from the kill zones. Enemy fire ceased. The entire simulation recalibrated, as if acknowledging the choice. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the world froze. All projections went dark. The city vanished. The cadets found themselves standing once again in the open field of the crucible chamber, under white light. A figure stood at the far end of the platform. Plain fatigues, hands clasped behind her back. Major Morgan. Not a projection. Real. She looked older than the last time Vance had seen her, lines etched deeper around her eyes, hair tied back in a tight braid. But her presence carried the same gravity, quiet, unshakable. No one dared speak. She walked toward them slowly, boots echoing on the metal floor. When she stopped, her gaze moved across the group, over every face, every trembling hand. Finally, her eyes met Vance's. He straightened, not in fear but in respect. Her voice was calm. "You rebuilt this place," she said, "but I had to know if it would hold." Vance nodded slightly. "Did it?" Morgan's expression softened just a fraction. "Yes," she said, "it did." She turned to Avery. "You led when no one told you to. You chose compassion when the rules didn't reward it." Avery's voice trembled. "I just did what felt right." Morgan smiled faintly. "Then you did everything right." She looked around the chamber, at the young faces watching her in awe, at the quiet reverence that filled the space. "You've all proven that this institution can still teach the one thing no simulation can measure: integrity." Then her tone changed, quieter, heavier. But integrity must be tested, again and again, because the day it stops being questioned is the day it dies. She paused, eyes lingering on the plaque mounted above the chamber doors, the one that bore her creed. Competence is quiet. Her gaze softened. And silence, she said, isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of understanding. Then she turned, walking toward the exit. Vance took a step forward. "Ma'am." She stopped, glancing back only once. "Keep polishing those stairs," she said softly. "They'll need to shine long after we're gone." And with that she disappeared through the doorway, swallowed by the light. The next morning, the academy's systems returned to normal. No trace of the breach, no files, no digital signature. Just a single message left in the mainframe. Evaluation complete. Maintain the standard. No one ever saw her again. But from that day forward, the cadets didn't need to. Because her presence was no longer a legend. It was a living doctrine, written in silence, carried in every steady heartbeat that refused to falter when the noise came. What happens when a single act of quiet integrity ripples through an army built on noise? In the weeks following Major Morgan's final appearance, the academy felt different, lighter somehow, though no one could explain why. The drills were the same. The training was the same. But there was an awareness now, a stillness beneath the motion, as if every cadence step carried a question. What would she have done? The incident Stage 2, as the servers recorded it, was officially labeled a classified evaluation event. No one admitted it happened. No one discussed it in public, but every cadet knew, and that kind of truth, once seen, can't be forgotten. General Thorne sat in his office long after midnight, the lights dim, a single monitor illuminating his face. He had replayed the footage a dozen times, the holographic city, the moment the cadets disobeyed the system to save the simulated civilians, the moment Morgan stepped from the shadows. He paused the frame where she looked up at the observation window, as if she knew he was watching. Her expression was unreadable, not pride, not satisfaction, something deeper, something like hope. He leaned back, rubbing his temple. The file on his desk was thin, but its contents weighed more than any battle report he'd ever written. It was Morgan's final note, a one-page debrief transmitted directly to Joint Command before she vanished again. You don't fix institutions by punishing them. You fix them by reminding them what they were meant to be. Thorne exhaled, the words echoing in his mind. He had commanded divisions, orchestrated campaigns, briefed presidents, but this was something else. She hadn't just trained soldiers, she'd resurrected purpose. He picked up his comm device and dialed a secure channel. "Pierce, Matt, we need to talk." 2 days later, a closed-door summit convened at the Pentagon. No press, no cameras, just 3 generals, a handful of senior advisors, and a thin folder labeled Project Ghost Doctrine. Thorne spoke first. She tested the academy, twice. Each time she forced it to confront its own reflection. The result, a generation of cadets who think before they act, who feel before they fight. Pierce, ever the strategist, folded his hands. "And now you want to scale it." Matt frowned. "You're proposing we let an unsanctioned operative rewrite our doctrine." Thorne's reply was calm. "No, I'm proposing we follow it." He slid the folder across the table. Inside were transcripts, metrics, and simulation data, heart rate patterns, decision-making curves, empathy response indexes. The numbers spoke for themselves. Where traditional leadership models showed aggression spikes and stress collapse under failure, the new generation trained under Morgan's methods showed stability, emotional regulation, moral consistency, cognitive flexibility. Pierce leaned forward, scanning the data. "They're not faster," he murmured, "but they're steadier." "Exactly," Thorne said. "She taught them not how to fight, but how to endure." Matt's voice softened. And in the next war, endurance will matter more than speed. A silence settled over the room. Finally, Pierce closed the file. What do we call it? Thorne looked out the window at the city lights below. She already named it, he said. Ghost Doctrine. Months passed. The doctrine spread quietly at first through officer academies, then through entire branches. It wasn't introduced as policy. It was whispered, studied, adopted by those who'd seen what noise could destroy. Combat instructors began incorporating empathy-driven leadership scenarios. Tactical manuals were rewritten to include moral decision layers. Even drone command training, once purely mechanical, now included human factor simulations, requiring operators to weigh collateral ethics before engagement. At first, it faced resistance. Some old guard officers mocked it as philosophy dressed as training. But then came Falcon Ridge. It was a remote forward outpost in northern Syria, a dusty plateau of concrete walls and satellite dishes. A small Allied detachment, led by a young captain named Rhodes, one of the first graduates under the new doctrine, found themselves surrounded by militia fighters. Cut off, outnumbered, and days from reinforcements, the situation was dire. Tradition would have dictated a desperate defense: hold position, burn ammunition, call for air support. But Rhodes didn't do that. Instead, he ordered radio silence. Then, using principles he'd learned from the Ghost simulations, he studied the militia's behavior. Their movements weren't random. Their supply convoys passed at predictable intervals. They were disciplined, hungry, but not reckless. On the second night, Rhodes sent a single drone message to the enemy commander. Not a threat, not a bluff. A question. You don't want this hill, you want the road beneath it. We can both leave alive. Talk. For 2 hours, nothing, then a reply. A meeting was arranged. At dawn, the militia leader approached under a white flag. They didn't sign a treaty or shake hands. They just spoke, two soldiers, tired of dying for symbols neither of them owned. The outpost was evacuated peacefully. Not one shot fired. When the report reached the Pentagon, most refused to believe it, but Thorne did. He read it once, then simply wrote in the margin. The Ghost Doctrine, confirmed operational. Back at West Point, the story spread like wildfire. Cadets gathered in the mess hall, listening to the rumor that somewhere in Syria, a graduate had ended a battle without violence. Vance heard it too. He didn't smile, but something in his chest eased like a knot untangling. The legacy was working. He walked outside that evening, stopping as always at the stairs of Legacy. The brass railing gleamed under the fading sunset. Avery was there, standing quietly, tracing the edge of the plaque with her fingertips. "You heard?" she asked. He nodded. "Falcon Ridge." Yeah, her eyes were bright, proud. They called it the Ghost Solution. Vance exhaled softly. Of course they did. They stood there a while in comfortable silence. Finally, Avery asked, "Do you ever think she'll come back?" Vance shook his head. "She doesn't need to. She left herself everywhere. Every time someone chooses restraint over rage, she's there." A breeze moved across the courtyard, rustling the flags overhead. Somewhere distant, the faint echo of marching cadets blended with the hum of evening. Vance looked up at the plaque. "You know," he said quietly, "the funny thing about ghosts is they never really die. They just wait until you finally listen." Far away, thousands of miles from the academy, in a small safe house buried beneath the outskirts of Bucharest, a woman sat alone at a desk. No insignia, no nameplate, just a folder marked "Evaluation Complete" and a cup of untouched coffee. Major Morgan. Her uniform bore no medals. Her eyes, as always, revealed nothing. But there was a softness there now, the calm of someone who'd finally seen the tide turn. Her secure line blinked once, a coded transmission. She opened it. Ghost Doctrine implementation confirmed across 42 installations. Civilian incident mitigated. Your audit stands. She read it once, then deleted it. For a moment, she looked out the window. Beyond the glass, dawn was breaking, thin gold light touching the city rooftops. A memory stirred. A staircase, cold granite under her palms, and laughter that had once cut through her silence. She smiled faintly, not with triumph, with peace. Her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes the lesson isn't to win, it's to remind them why they started fighting at all. She closed the blinds, packed her file, and disappeared into the gray morning, one more shadow among many. Weeks later, a small, anonymous package arrived at West Point's administrative office. No sender, no return address. Inside was a single compass, old, scratched military issue. Attached was a note written in a familiar, steady hand. To whoever carries the weight next. Find your north quietly. Yem. The compass was placed in the Academy Museum under protective glass, beside the plaque at the Stairs of Legacy. Cadets passed it every day, not as an artifact but as a reminder. Avery touched the glass one morning before her final exam and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the bell tower struck 8. The sound rang through the campus, clear, measured, and calm. For the first time in decades, the academy didn't just train soldiers. It raised professionals. And all because one woman had shown them that sometimes the most powerful command is the one given in silence. Years later, historians would debate her methods. Some called her radical, others revolutionary. But the soldiers who lived by her creed didn't care about the arguments. They just called her what she always was, the Ghost. And in every mission, every debrief, every moment where humanity hung by a thread, her words remained unspoken but ever present. True strength doesn't shout. It endures. What happens when the lesson leaves the classroom and meets the sound of real gunfire? It started far from the academy's granite walls, in a dry stretch of mountain desert straddling the border of two nations that officially didn't exist. Night fell like ink over the jagged ridgelines, and under its cover, a convoy of armored transports crawled through the darkness, engines whispering, lights dimmed. Inside the lead vehicle sat Lieutenant Avery. Her uniform bore no insignia but one, a small silver patch over her chest that read Doctrine Operator, Ghost Division. She had graduated top of her class the year before, the first cadet trained entirely under Major Morgan's reform. Now, she wasn't just inheriting Morgan's methods. She was about to prove whether they could survive the real world. Her unit, 12 operators, hand-picked from multiple branches, had been deployed on a joint intelligence recovery mission. Their target, an insurgent command post in the ruins of a decommissioned research facility. The intel inside, according to command, contained encrypted data stolen from Allied networks. But there was one problem. No one was entirely sure who the enemy was. Satellite imagery showed movement, heat signatures, even communication lines, but every feed came back scrambled. It was as if someone wanted to be found, but only by those who knew what to look for. As the convoy approached the outer perimeter, Avery's comm crackled with static, then a single phrase, distorted, barely audible. Evaluation continuing. She froze. The driver glanced at her. "Ma'am." She didn't answer right away. Her heart had stopped for half a beat. The voice had been faint, almost mechanical but familiar. Too familiar. She swallowed hard. "Keep driving," she said. They reached the drop zone at 200 hours. The night air was thin and cold. A full moon lit the compound ahead, twisted steel, broken walls, and shadows that didn't quite behave like shadows should. Avery knelt beside the tactical map, projected on her wrist display. Team 1 secures the east flank. Team 2 with me, we enter the main lab complex. No comms beyond local. She paused, scanning their faces. They were all young, but their eyes were different, calm like hers, ghost-trained. Remember, she said, we don't act until we understand. It was Morgan's first rule, and the most dangerous one in a live operation. They moved like whispers through the ruins. The only sound was the crunch of sand under boots. Inside the complex, broken monitors flickered to life, static and fragments of code streaming across the screens. Every so often, a word appeared in the glitching lines. Observe. Endure. Adapt. A shiver ran down Avery's spine. Someone had built this place as a reflection of them. A mirror. They advanced deeper, sweeping the corridors. No contacts, no hostiles, just empty hallways and the low hum of power that shouldn't have been running in an abandoned base. Then movement. A shape flickered at the end of the hall, human-sized. Her second-in-command raised his weapon. Hold, Avery whispered. The figure stepped into the light unarmed, wearing a simple desert cloak. His face was lined, his expression calm. Who are you? She demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head, almost curious, and said softly, You shouldn't have come here. Then the lights cut out. Gunfire erupted from nowhere. The corridor exploded into chaos, muzzle flashes, shouts, echoes bouncing off concrete. Avery dove for cover, pulling her team behind an overturned workstation. Suppressive fire, grid 7, she shouted. But the gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. No movement, no enemies. Just silence. Her heart pounded. The sensors showed nothing. The heat signatures had vanished completely. Then her headset clicked again, that same voice, softer this time. How do you fight what you can't hate? Avery froze. That wasn't a threat. It was a question. And she knew that voice. It wasn't Morgan, not exactly, but it was her words, fed through an artificial modulator. Someone or something was running an evolved version of the Ghost simulation. A live combat variant. Her mind raced. The breach at West Point, the encoded message months ago, evaluation complete. Had it really been complete? Or had it just moved? She rallied her team and pushed forward. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they cleared the complex, each encounter stranger than the last. Enemy combatants appeared and vanished like phantoms. When captured, their visors showed nothing but mirrored glass. It was psychological warfare, pure and surgical. By dawn, only 3 of her team remained uninjured. They found the central chamber, the supposed data vault. Inside, a single terminal flickered. On its screen, a message blinked. You've learned everything except when to stop. Avery approached slowly. Her reflection wavered in the glass. Who's running this? A pause, then a response typed itself out, one word at a time. You. The console powered down. Her breath caught. She looked around the room, the shadows, the empty walls, and something clicked. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't even a mission. It was another evaluation. But this time, the battlefield was her own judgment. Outside, the horizon burned gold with morning. The rest of the squad regrouped at the ridge, tired, shaken, but alive. No casualties. No intel retrieved. No answers. Avery stood apart, looking down at the valley below. Her comm buzzed once more, a short encrypted burst, invisible to the others. She opened it. Well done, the doctrine holds. It was signed simply, M. Avery closed her eyes. For a long moment, she let the desert wind wash over her. Then she whispered, You were never testing me, were you? Silence. She smiled faintly. You were testing the doctrine itself. Back at command, General Thorne reviewed the after-action report. It made no sense. no casualties, no confirmed hostiles, no identifiable enemy. Yet the mission data showed over 30 tactical decision events, each more complex than the last. He scrolled to the bottom and stopped at Avery's closing line. We walked into an ambush that taught us nothing about the enemy, only about ourselves. Thorne leaned back, exhaling slowly. It was exactly what Morgan would have written. He picked up the phone. "Pierce," he said, "you were right, she's still shaping them." Weeks later, Avery stood before the class of incoming cadets at West Point. She wore her field uniform, dust still clinging to the fabric, hair tied back, face calm but weathered. They listened in absolute silence as she spoke. "There's a story you've all heard," she began, "about a woman who got shoved down these stairs." A faint smile touched her lips. She didn't shout, she didn't fight back. She just got up and built something that can't be broken. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the hall. "You're here to learn tactics, strategy, command, but before any of that, learn to listen. Because the enemy isn't always outside. Sometimes it's in the noise you carry inside your own head." Her voice softened. "The Ghost Doctrine isn't about silence. It's about control. And if you learn that, truly learn it, you'll never need to raise your voice to be heard." For a moment, she saw them, hundreds of young faces, watching her with the same reverence she once had for a woman she barely knew. The cycle continued. And deep inside, she wondered if Morgan was out there, listening unseen as always. That night in her quarters, Avery found a sealed envelope slipped beneath her door. No markings, no sender. Inside, a single photograph. Grainy, old. A younger Morgan standing in a desert, her face half-lit by dawn, eyes squinting into the distance. On the back, 3 words written in faint ink. "Still your heart." Avery sat on her bunk for a long time, holding the photo, the hum of the night settling around her like a memory she didn't own. Then she whispered the same words back into the dark. "Still your heart." And for the first time, she understood what Morgan had been teaching all along. That leadership isn't about being followed. It's about leaving something behind that doesn't need you anymore. Across the world, in some unmarked location where no map dared speak its name, a woman stood on a hill overlooking a small convoy disappearing into the distance. Major Morgan. Her hair, now streaked with silver, moved in the wind. Her face was lined with time, not age, but consequence. She watched the vehicles vanish, then turned away, whispering softly to the empty air. "They're ready now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small compass, the twin of the one sent to the academy. The needle trembled once, then steadied. And with that, she began to walk. Not toward war, not toward peace, but toward the next quiet lesson that the world didn't know it needed yet. Because ghosts never stop teaching. They just change who's listening. What does silence sound like when it finally finds peace? For years, she had been a name whispered in the corridors of command. Major Morgan, the ghost who'd rebuilt an army without ever firing a shot. But to her, the legacy never felt finished. Not until she went back to where it all began. The chopper's rotors cut through a gray dawn, carrying her over a stretch of forgotten mountains along the Afghan border, a place where dust buried both mistakes and memories. She sat alone, visor down, wind howling through the open hatch. In her lap, a single old photo, a man in uniform smiling faintly beside a young girl, both standing on a flight line shimmering with heat. Her father, Colonel Daniel Morgan, killed during a forward operation 20 years ago, a mission she was never told the truth about. For years, she'd believed it was an ambush. Then, during her time inside the audit division, she uncovered fragments, encrypted reports, casualty logs, redacted statements. Something hadn't added up. He wasn't ambushed, he was abandoned. and the same institution that taught her discipline had buried that truth beneath silence. Now, finally, she was going to dig it up. The helicopter touched down in a valley of rusted hangars and cracked concrete. Once a classified base, now just bones of a forgotten war. She stepped out slowly, boots crunching against the gravel. No escort, no comms. Only a location coordinate sent anonymously months ago. A message signed with 2 letters she hadn't seen in years. DM. Her pulse slowed. Could it be him? No, impossible. She tightened her grip on her sidearm and moved through the ruins. The air smelled of oil and memory. Inside the command bunker, dust danced in thin shafts of sunlight cutting through holes in the ceiling. She passed rooms where walls were still scarred with bullet marks, old maps curling on the tables, radios long dead. Then she saw it, the remnants of a mural on one cracked wall. A faded motto, painted years ago. Lead loud, die proud. She stared at it for a long time. Then softly she said, no, lead quiet, live true. Down the corridor, a single light glowed. She followed it. It led her into a control room still powered by a backup generator. On the table, an old terminal blinked with life, its green text faint but legible. Classified file, Operation WHITCOMB. Access granted, M. Morgan audit override. Her breath caught. She began scrolling through the report. Coordinates, call signed, transcripts. And then a field note, signed by her father. If you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. Don't be angry at them. Command doesn't break because of orders, it breaks because of silence. Her eyes blurred. The words hit harder than any battle she'd ever fought. She whispered, you knew. If I had one wish, the note continued, it's that you learn to speak without shouting, to fix what I couldn't. A single tear fell onto the console. For all her strength, all her composure, all her control, she had never truly let herself cry for him. Until now. She closed the file and stepped outside. The sun had climbed higher, painting the mountains in gold. For the first time in years she felt still, not cold, not haunted, just human. A voice came through her earpiece, faint static, then Thorne's deep tone. Major Morgan, this is command. You're off-grid, do you copy? She smiled faintly, copy, sir. Thorne hesitated. Are you where I think you are? Yes, she said softly, and I've found what I came for. He exhaled on the other end. What do you plan to do with it? She looked out across the valley, the wreckage, the ghosts, the silence that no longer frightened her. Nothing, she said. The truth doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs to be seen. Thorne's voice softened. You did what none of us could. Morgan smiled. No, they did. You mean your cadets? She nodded. They're not mine anymore, they belong to the silence. Back at West Point, that same morning, the academy was preparing for its annual graduation ceremony. Avery stood in formation, sunlight reflecting off rows of polished insignia. She'd been selected to deliver the cadet address, a tradition usually reserved for those with political families, not quiet operators from small towns. When her name was called, she walked to the podium, heart steady, posture straight. Behind her, the banner rippled in the wind. She began softly, her voice clear, deliberate. There's a line we all learn early, lead loud, lead proud, but we learned something different. We learned that leadership isn't about being heard, it's about being understood. A hush fell over the crowd. We stand here today because one person refused to let silence mean defeat. She taught us that the loudest act of courage is sometimes to stand back up, without saying a word. A single tear tracked down her cheek, though she didn't falter. To Major Morgan, wherever you are, we remember. The crowd didn't cheer. They stood in silence. Hundreds of cadets, heads bowed, hands over hearts. And in that stillness, the air seemed to hum, as if something unseen had passed among them. Far away, Morgan stood on a ridge overlooking the sea. The wind tugged at her jacket as gulls wheeled above. In the distance, a transport ship moved slowly across the horizon, carrying the next generation she'd trained, bound for missions she'd never know. She took out her compass, the old one scratched and dented. The needle quivered, then settled on true north. Her voice was quiet, carried away by the ocean breeze. "You found it," she said, "all of you." She pulled from her pocket the same folded photograph, her father and her younger self. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Then she tore the bottom corner, writing a few words with her pen before letting the piece drift into the sea. The torn fragment fluttered once, caught a gust of wind, and vanished into the waves. That night she sat beside a campfire near the cliffs, her pack by her side, the stars sharp and endless above. For the first time in years, she didn't check her comms, didn't scan for signals, didn't anticipate orders. She just listened to the soft hiss of the fire, the rhythm of the tide, the quiet heartbeat of a life finally unburdened. Her thoughts drifted to every cadet who'd ever stood at those stairs, to Vance polishing the rail, to Avery teaching in silence, to Thorne fighting for reform. And somewhere, faintly, she could almost hear her father's voice. Steady, calm, proud. "You fixed it, kid. You turned the noise into purpose." She smiled, eyes glistening in the firelight. "Not me," she whispered, "them." At dawn, hikers passing through the cliffs found her camp, the fire cold, the tent empty. Only her compass remained, resting on a stone overlooking the ocean. Beside it, a folded page weighed down with a single rock. They unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, deliberate. "Leadership isn't command. It's conscience. If I taught you nothing else, remember this. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Yem. Months later, that note was framed beside the Academy's eternal flame, the light that burned every night above the parade ground. Cadets often stopped there after drills, sometimes not even knowing why. They just stand quietly, eyes reflecting the glow. Avery was one of them. She visited often, sometimes after long missions, sometimes after lectures. And each time, she'd whisper the same words before turning away. "Thank you for teaching us how to be quiet." Years passed, wars came and went. The Ghost Doctrine became legend, refined, expanded, and eventually renamed the Morgan Code. But those who'd lived through its birth knew the truth. It was never about tactics. It was about humanity. And somewhere beyond history, in every act of restraint, in every decision made with calm conviction instead of anger, she lived on not as a name in a textbook, but as a standard in their hearts. Narrator's voice softens. "The world remembers the ones who shout. But it's built by those who don't. The ones who stand back up after the fall. The ones who fix what's broken without being seen. The ones who lead quietly." The final image fades to the brass plaque at West Point, its letters catching the morning sun. The auditor, "Competence is quiet." And beneath it, newly engraved, "In honor of Major M. Morgan, the ghost who taught silence to lead." The camera lingers. Wind brushes through the trees. Footsteps echo softly on the stairs, not heavy, not hurried, just steady. A young cadet kneels to polish the brass rail, just as Vance once did. And when she looks up, for the briefest moment she smiles. Because she swears she hears it, a woman's voice, gentle and far away. "Keep it shining." Fade to black. Soft orchestral strings rise slow, hopeful, final. Narrator whisper. "Sometimes ghosts don't haunt. They guide."